Okay, fantastic. So, welcome back. I hope you had a good opportunity over lunch to interact with our researchers at their posters and to check out some of our demos. And there will be further opportunity in the coffee break before the next session as well. I'm pleased to host and moderate this second panel then today, which is on authenticity and copyright in the creative sector. Just like with Glenn's panel earlier, we're going to have 5 lightning talks, 5 minutes each, and then we're then going to welcome our panelists onto the stage and have some basically discussion around the topic. So we're going to kick off with the first talk, which conveniently I'm going to give, which is basically from Tu, who is a postdoc that worked with us on the centre for a number of years. This is actually slightly older work, which is the reason I'm presenting it rather than Tu. He's moved on to work in industry R&D now. But it's really about a framework we developed to make provenance information sticky and attached to assets in a durable way as they move around on the internet. So this is a big challenge. As we discussed earlier, there are open standards like CTPA which encode provenance information into assets, but actually that information is stripped away from assets by most content platforms, particularly social media platforms, as they pass through it. So if I were to take this image here of this armadillo, I believe, and I upload it with its content credentials onto a platform like X, then those credentials would be stripped by the platform. So, we in DECaDE have been working on solving this problem for a number of years. Back in 2022, we developed a fingerprinting algorithm, which is a way to take a sort of a hash of content and re-identify the content using that hash. This is a technology that then was subsequently adopted by a number of people in industry. You can see this technology, or a variant of it, being used in some of the Adobe products. So this is a good example here of an early use of AI labeling, actually. When Adobe first launched its Firefly model, this is an image here, this hummingbird of a beta of its model, it would basically put content credentials CTPA inside there. It has been doing that since 2022, and it would also fingerprint the content, so that then if you were to take a photo of it, say off a monitor in a canteen, as here, and drop it into an inspection tool, it will go look up that metadata using a fingerprint of the asset. Now that works really well if your user is forensically dragging and dropping assets into a tool to check for provenance information. But of course, in reality, you'd want it to be a much more kind of fluid experience than that. Ideally, you would have the content being scanned for content credentials, even as you're like browsing the web, for example. And that's where something like watermarking comes in. Watermarking, again, is a content re-identification tool. In this case, you can see it operating within a browser extension. This is detecting the Trustmark watermark that DECaDE developed with Adobe, and basically it is detecting on the client side the presence of this watermark, and if it's present, it will again look up the content credentials and display them to the user. So this idea of basically reinforcing the cryptographically signed metadata of CTPA with fingerprinting and watermarking, we refer to as the 3 pillars of provenance. I touched on this slide earlier. Basically, the takeaway from this slide is that there isn't a single best technology for this. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, these 3 ways of doing it. But there is a way of combining these to create a strong provenance layer. The way to do this is to detect a watermark, use the watermark to go look up the metadata that might have been stripped by the platform, and then before you return that metadata, to do basically a security check. And the security check is to look at the watermark-bearing image, extract a fingerprint from it, and compare that fingerprint to a fingerprint that is basically cryptographically signed inside that manifest. And only if they match, display it. And that guards against spoofing of the watermark. So this 3 pillars approach was something we published, quite some time ago now. It's been integrated as a concept into open standards. It's been cited in many policy documents. For example, in the draft EU Code of Practice for AI, it talks about multi-layered provenance, which is basically this idea. Partnership on AI built it into their ontology of media provenance. In the recent UK debate around copyright and AI. It's been cited explicitly in the Lord's report on AI copyright in the creative industries, and DCMS have even referred to it as a triple lock, which is nice. So, and it's also been referred to as durable content credentials inside a report by National Cybersecurity Centre and NSA that published a report on durable content credentials early last year. So yeah, just highlighting really that as an impact area for DECaDE. So I'll invite Katerina up next for the next lightning talk.
Right, thanks, John. So we have seen how content credentials and C2PA attach these verifiable provenance signals to digital media. But then the immediate challenge is to make sure that this is accessible to everyone and also in real-world context. So in this talk, I will focus in particular on the creative sector, where decisions about authenticity, credit, and copyright are central to professional and commercial consequences for the sector. So content credentials can help answer the question, where does this file come from and what happened to it? But in practice, the questions that determine whether these provenance signals are adopted and are effective can vary according to who is accessing this content, be it audience members, publishers, or creators, who might have different kind of questions. For example, what does this information mean for me personally? What should be shown and when? Or how do we express intent, credit, and usage rights? So a core message from our work is that provenance, beyond being a technical infrastructure, is also a social system that depends on different kinds of shared interpretation, norms, and expectations. So involving in the discussion the creative community is central, and also the wider ecosystem beyond the creative community is central to understand how this technology can be adopted for at least 3 reasons that I'm going to briefly talk about. So first is because authenticity varies by context. So in creative practice, authenticity can mean many different things. It can mean fidelity to an artistic process, appropriate attribution, documented permission and licensing, or faithfulness to the creative expression and intent of the creator. So provenance design that assumes just one single definition risks missing what matters to creative work and also overlooking forms of accountability that are already shared by the sector. Second is because disclosure changes how content itself is perceived. So labels and credentials can help people make sense of the content that they are engaging with, but they can also shape judgment and behavior. So poorly framed signals can inadvertently stigmatize legitimate creative workflows, for example, or penalize creators who are using tools in a responsible way. So the only reliable way to avoid this kind of misunderstandings and challenges is to develop provenance experiences with the people who actually have to live with these consequences. And third is because adoption depends on workflow reality. So creators and creative organizations often operate under constraints in terms of time, budget, tools, or legal pressures and reputational risk. So if provenance tools are difficult to integrate in their workflows, then compliance might be uneven. And so engagement with the sector is part of making implementation feasible as well as legitimate. As a research group, we have tested language and interaction ideas around authenticity and provenance with creative communities. And one example is our work reported in the Content Authenticities paper that you can see here. And for this particular study, we convened participants across the creative media supply chain to develop a shared vocabulary of what provenance is for and what it means for them, and what trade-offs also it introduces. And the key output from this work is the framing of multiple authenticities. So it's not just one kind of authenticity, but many. And this is intended as an aid for both design and policy, so to help move discussion beyond just single questions around what authenticity is and why it matters, and support provenance experiences that address the different needs for all these kind of communities and stakeholders that we briefly looked at before. And follow-on support through the BRAID project, embracing the complexities of authenticity, supported by the Bridging Responsible AI Divide, is enabling us to scale this work and engage with specific communities. So in particular with the music sector and the moving image community. We just had a workshop yesterday here in London about that, to explore how needs and expectations around authenticity can vary according to the sector. So to conclude, C2PA provides an important technical foundation and is an enabling infrastructure, but the success of content credentials also depends on how they are interpreted by these different communities, how they fit into real workflows, and how they are governed. So if we want provenance to support both public trust and also creative livelihoods, which we have started to talk about already today, then consent, credit, and intent need to be treated as core requirements alongside verification. Right. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. And thank you, Katerina, for sort of setting out really a lot of what we've been doing at Edinburgh is trying to engage creatives and think about what happens when we use some of these technologies and protocols in the real world. What I'm going to do today is talk as much about the way in which we do that in design informatics as well. And what's crucial to our approach, and hopefully that some of you will have seen already in the demos next door, is where we're trying to design novel prototypes and study people's experiences of them. And crucially for us as well, what we learn is not just in how people react, but in actually trying to put this in something which we're going to put in a museum in front of the general public. It really forces us to confront, oh, this is quite confusing. This bit needs more explanation. Or it doesn't feel right if we do that. So we're really striving for, actually, what does it mean to start doing design, and how do we support design practitioners? We're doing a current study as well, looking at UX practitioners specifically, and how can we support them better in designing interfaces that incorporate things like C2PA. So we're really interested in the design, as well as studying how people engage with these. I'm going to skip through very quickly 3 of the projects, the main outcomes from our work at Edinburgh. But fundamentally, they all come back to this question of how can we use DLTs to design things like ownership, licensing, attribution. These are not traditionally things we think about designing, but we can design ownership. We can design attribution in lots of different ways. As Katerina just demonstrated, authenticity is not just a stated fact. It's something we can design how people interact with it and interpret it in different ways. And that's what all these all these artifacts do. So token gesture, this was at the height of the NFT boom, and again, figuring out how do we engage critically with this moment in a way that's responsible, gives people an experience that helps them understand what they're seeing in the news, and let's sort of interrogate what's going on for people here. The key thing for this exhibition was that the NFTs were non-transferable, so you couldn't buy or sell the NFTs you produced from engaging with this exhibition. And when you take away that speculative value, that economic part, what are you left with? And here, actually, in practice, our participants told us it was a proof of participation. They could say, I was here at this moment. I've uniquely got this experience, this artwork. And it really sort of spoke to the kind of inherent value people place on owning something. And that sort of speaks to the paper came out of this. We're talking about the nature of ownership design and how we can design different experiences of ownership. The other thing that's going on here is that what people really cared about was it was relational. It's demonstrating I have a relationship with this piece of media. This artwork, this NFT, came from me being in Edinburgh on this day. And it's sort of that relational work that we see recurring through each of these artifacts. The second one of these was Origin. Now, Origin was first created really as a way to try, how can we demonstrate in a tangible way lots of the technologies that John's demonstrated to you already. And this was really, this is still running online and you can go and have a play. And it really steps you through what's actually happening when you engage with the Aura protocol. And this one we ran as part of a field lab with Digital Catapult. But what we in terms of interviews, we interview creative professionals and people working in the cultural and creative sector to really explore what does it mean if we start tokenizing rights, and what does tokenization do for you, and what will things like smart contracts do to help you manage rights in different ways. And we published this in the Journal of Cultural Economy, and really, again, what we start to see is there's sort of many different implications at different stages of the supply chain. So whether you're a producer, someone involved in remixing and distributing that work, or a consumer, lots of things where creatives have this kind of dilemma where they're forced to engage with these platforms to be discovered, to get their work out there. What they really were looking for was just more control and more ways to manage that. But also lots of tensions around machine readable and automation, and realizing that there's so many bespoke cases, we need to be quite thoughtful before assuming that we can put everything into a smart contract. So really identifying the kinds of data that are valuable to people to sort of fix and share. And then lastly, while in the previous study that involved us kind of sitting down with people and doing a sort of walkthrough of here's how the technology works, we wanted something that was like a kind of public exhibition where anyone could come and have a play with it. And so we turned to sort of storytelling as something that anyone can tell a bit of a story. This is something we ran in 4 different locations, and with this one we were exploring everyday users and the way in which we're all prosumers, we're all producing some forms of content online. And we might not think about ourselves as having any rights or ownership in relation to that, but in many cases we could, or we might start to care about it if that platform changes its policies in some ways. So here we were inviting people to come along, write a little bit of a story, and then we're going to ask you, how can we use it? Do you mind if we take it and do this? Can we change the wording a little bit? Do you mind if we give it to an AI to look at? And what we really were interviewing people about was, when does this start to matter to you? And what other contexts in your life? It might be a Wikipedia entry. It might be a YouTube channel. It might be your Instagram feed that you run anonymously. What other contexts does this kind of thing come up for you, even if it's not your primary professional career? Again, what was really crucial here was the multifaceted nature of attribution. It's not just a simple fact that everyone wants attributed. They want different things attributed. It's a really relational, sort of social act to give attribution. It's particular situated meanings. And this is different in every field. It's different for games designers. It's different for photographers. It's different for authors, for poets. And so really what we've been looking at across this work is the way in which when we take these technical opportunities and possibilities, when we deploy them in the real world, we need to really carefully design them to sort of recognize things like ownership and attribution of things we need to design, and to really to sort of look at the sort of care and nuance that's required for communities to adopt and feel trust in these kinds of technologies. And ultimately, very often that comes back to something effective and experiential. And a lot of the work we do is really trying to give people that momentary glimpse, that experience, where they can go, oh, this is what this might mean for me. Thank you.
Hi. So John has already talked a lot about provenance, as are the other speakers, right? And in this work, we'll try to look at provenance from a different perspective. So C2PA has done credible work in the past couple of years in trying to protect and verify media provenance. But what happens when we fix the narrative to be a false narrative, when we take a piece of image and we spread a false narrative with it? Yeah, I've lost my script. Yeah. So the idea is what happens when we take a piece of asset and we try to spread a false narrative about it. How do we prevent against that? So the idea is to move beyond asset provenance. So standard provenance tries to verify how an image is created and modified over time. But misinformation thrives on reusing existing images, right? So we need to look at the narrative the asset is telling, not only just what the asset, the modifications within that asset. So thus we need to verify the narrative surrounding the asset. To address all of this, we propose a framework that moves away from asset provenance towards narrative provenance. And we try to use language models to find all these distinct narratives. But you can imagine for a simple topic, which is about sports, different narratives will be very similar. But when you tackle complex topics like, or divisive topics like politics, climate, or conflict, the narratives differ a lot. And then when you try to use all of those narratives to define provenance, the language models get confused. Or it picks up the most common narrative or middle ground, which is completely hallucinated. Thus, we propose traceable content trails, like traceable trails of the narrative. And this is the most important part of a solution. So what we do is we mimic AI agent, who mimics a journalist, who gathers evidence about a piece of information and then tries to figure out which of it is relevant to the given claim. We do this through multimodal AI techniques. And then once we have these filtered evidence, we sort of find the distinct narratives at play. So we apply clustering to this. And this clustering leads to improved results, right? So basically, instead of feeding the language model all of the different narratives, if we cluster it out and then feed it to them, the language models perform better in the results, right? So in this particular case, we found two distinct narratives, and the language model was able to concile both those narratives into a single explanation, right? Our model does fail primarily because of retrieval issues when it cannot find the evidence, or because of under-clustering issues, which is basically when a journalistic voice gets drowned by a lot of propaganda. But apart from these scenarios, our results improve upon the state of art on most of existing data sets. So in summary, it's a decision support tool, and trying to move from media provenance to narrative provenance. We're trying to bridge the gap between asset and its real-world usage. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to, also building on the notion of provenance, I'm going to talk about it in the context of privacy preservation. So John touched a bit on this in the kind of opening talk, an issue of how can creatives prove ownership or prove that they're connected to an image without revealing their identity. So yeah, in many cases, creators are very keen to associate their identity with their work because it's about building their reputation and all this sort of thing. But there are certain circumstances where they may want to kind of be anonymous. So if they're whistleblowers or they're activists or citizen journalists or that kind of thing, they may not actually want to have their identity revealed with respect to the kind of image that they're showing and putting out there, but they still want to put the image out there for the reasons that they've taken it. Currently, photographers can insert their identity into the metadata, either their real name or maybe a pseudonym, but that's still an identifier for them, or they can put the image out without any identity data. And each of these has disadvantages. So if they include their identity data, that's got implications for their privacy. But if they omit the identity data, then it's difficult for them to prove authorship after the event when the image is out there. Even with this metadata, they're not able to say, yeah, that was me that took that. So we've been exploring how a photographer can assert authorship, but in a privacy-preserving way. So our part of DECaDE from the Cybersecurity Centre has been focusing around kind of self-sovereign identity technology and applications of that. So as we've seen, self-sovereign identity, again, we've seen this once or twice already. It's an approach to identity management that gives the control to the subject as to the credentials that are issued, when those credentials are used, and indeed what kind of information is used from those credentials. So the photographer can manage the credentials for the image. So the idea of this is around the image itself generating a credential that the photographer controls as part of their digital identity, if you like, and that gives them control over what information they can expose and when, but without revealing their identity. So the point of self-sovereign identity is it has this notion of selective disclosure, where certain parts of information can be disclosed while protecting other parts of the information. So the photographer can then exercise their rights and choose when to prove authorship and who they'll prove authorship to without actually needing to reveal who they are, but they can still prove they are the author of a particular image. And this is underpinned by cryptographic technology and so on. So privacy-preserving proofs that can verify claims about the image or about the credentials that go with the image. So this complements a lot of the work that we've seen going on here, where we have some digital content being created and being distributed, and then there's fingerprinting, and there's all the provenance metadata that goes with that. That's coming along the top and then down here. But there's also, separate to that, or alongside that, there's kind of identity information. So there'll be identity credentials that the photographer has that also go with the particular image that they want to that they want to be able to exercise rights over. And the relationship between those identity credentials and the other metadata is controlled by the creator, so they are able to exercise their rights when, if and when they want to do so. So this was actually the first field lab some time back in the DECaDE project with the Digital Catapult, developing a prototype or demonstrator of this technology, and John showed the video explainer, the animation that goes with that. So it enables creators to share the digital content anonymously while retaining their ability to assert their rights over the content. So that's essentially the idea of not needing a third-party organization, one of these central large platforms that's managing their identity or managing this relationship, because it's giving the control in a decentralized way back to the photographer. And although we've been looking at images, but in a sense this will apply to any kind of digital content. It's just that we were using images as a kind of exemplar, as a particular case study. So I'll stop there, and thank you.
Great. Thank you to all of our speakers again for those spotlight talks, and just a reminder that there are posters and demos for all of those works out in the coffee break. So at this point, I'd like to invite our panelists for the session up onto the stage, please. So we have Mercedes, Nigel, and Becky, if you wouldn't mind just taking a seat. Oh, I won't be strict like Glenn and make you sit in specific places. And I'll ask you each to introduce yourselves once you're settled and say perhaps a little bit about your interest in this area. So, yeah, fantastic. So maybe perhaps, Becky, we can start with yourself. If you wouldn't mind just briefly introducing yourself and your interest in the area.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Becky Gregory-Clark. I'm the Head of Innovation at the National Film and Television School and for the CoStar National Lab, which is a UKRI-backed creative R&D laboratory network of labs that will be are currently opening across the UK. And we did a project with John and his team last year called the Time to Act report that was really kicked off by at the time, and we'll probably get into this, but the government consultation about AI and copyright, and we got involved because it's sort of our role sitting in between research and industry and trying to connect those dots. And it's an area that's of such importance and such passion. There's such passion behind it from all the industry people we work with, so it's really important to us.
Hi, I'm Nigel Earnshaw. I work for BBC R&D. So I'm a technologist, really. I'm a research engineer, but I also, my interests over many years have been really around trusted devices, connected devices. So it sort of started back with the old sort of DRM world, trying to stop content being used in a sort of non-rightful fashion. But I actually attend and have done for many years, the C2PA technical working group. So I'm sort of familiar with all of that story, and also the sort of the sister standards authority, which looks after identity in C2PA, which is the core group. So they've been my sort of technical interests. And then just more recently, a recent development, I work with advisory, and we're very interested in the utility of blockchains, the utility of these new networks, what it means for our audience, what it means for trust, what it means for the new creative economy as it kind of emerges. So that's my kind of role at the moment.
Hi, my name's Mercedes Bunce. I'm Professor in Digital Culture and Society at King's College London in Digital Humanities. Since 2019, I run with Eva Jäger the Creative AI Lab at the Serpentine Gallery. And we did a project, we are really interested to see what artists bring to the conversation with AI and how the AI ecosystem looks a bit different from an artist perspective, and what technology or technical aspects, not just what aesthetical aspects, artists can bring when they tinker with AI. And the project I'm here about is a project with Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst, two artists. They asked the question, what could an ideal AI ecosystem look like, as part of their installation at Serpentine Gallery. That was last year. And it was a data intermediary-led project that had decentralized data from 15 UK choirs. And it was about creating a system. Can we create like a data trust where this data can be reused again or not? I'll tell more later.
Okay, thank you. Look forward to that. All right, thank you all for your introductions. So I'd like to ask, first of all, from your own perspectives, what you think has changed the most, either about how we create content or how we trust digital content over the past few years. I'm not sure who'd like to take that first.
Well, it's a big question. I mean, I think you already pointed out earlier, obviously big things changing around misinformation or information of unknown origin is not new, but the fact that it's so easy to create content and then spread that content is obviously a step change for everybody. And I think ultimately, I think, sorry, I've lost a train of thought there. But I think anything that leads us to a position now where you might see something online and really not know whether what you're seeing is real or where it's from or who made it. I think we're in a moment of questioning that more than we have ever done before. I think as, again, to a point you made earlier, we have moved away from more monolithic trusted sources of information. There's much more sort of news that happens peer-to-peer almost now that just didn't happen a few years ago. And that is really interesting from the point of view of people who are professional content creators. That really, from professional film, TV, games makers, their competitions are no longer other just professional content makers. Their competition is people all over the world. So that has made an enormous difference to this industry, as well as to the people who are consuming this content and where they think it's come from.
Yeah, a similar answer, but I think one of the drivers is of change, if you like, has sort of been social media, in the sense that back in the old days, when you saw media, you had a sense of context. You had a sense of whether this was artifice or a program that was made as an artistic work, or whether or not it was just a forensic witness of something, and that was sort of clear from context. But I think now, in the age of AI particularly, but also just social media more generally, there's this kind of nuanced bit in the middle where people are deliberately overemphasizing various aspects for clicks and trying to make more sensational videos. So now we've lost the context. We're never quite sure if something's true or not true, unless it very obviously is one of those things or the other. So that's the first thing, I think. And of course, now we're in the age of Patreon and Substack, right? This is the age of the creative media, creative cultures, and an emergence of participation. So I think that drives a lot of our thinking, a lot of the way that the world views media. And as Becky says, everything's a bit suspicious now. You can't quite be sure. You have to question the motives of the originator, as well as the actual sort of video or audio-video experience that you're viewing. So I think they're the real things that change. Apart from all the technological changes and the ease of this thing, I think this kind of social positioning is also a big area that's generated all this sort of mistrust and use video as a weapon almost.
I don't know if I hear us talk. I mean, we are all like the younger generation. I think comes in from a total different perspective and thinks like, great, the idea that an original once was authentic or true is not in their mind anymore because they never experienced this kind of culture where they don't trust the traditional media very much. They also don't trust TikTok, and it's quite interesting to see and talk to them and see how they work with the sharing and the distribution in a different way. What fascinates me most, I mean, I'm now also in my 50s and growing up with the digital over the last decades, I always saw quite a big potential in the possibility of sharing and technical sharing. And I think as a society and as an economy, we haven't fully used that to the way we can. And a lot of that potential that is in data sharing and this weird construct that data is, data sets are, is not really fully in our society. It has not arrived fully in our society. So it's got to be interesting.
Thanks for sharing those perspectives on what's changed. I wonder now, sort of turning to your own work and the verticals you'll each work in, where you're seeing really the biggest challenges around trust or ownership of digital content. Who'd like to take that first?
I'm happy to go first.
Yeah.
My turn? Okay.
Nice.
I mean, obviously, from a BBC point of view, the ownership and trust of content, and also the rise of AI sort of generally. Well, first of all, it weakens the value of video, so people become more suspicious of video. So it sort of degrades everybody to some extent. So I think we're sort of very worried about that, particularly in terms of news and the sort of harms that come from that. I think is kind of one of the big things. And other challenges are sort of things around, LLMs sort of act as an intermediary now, so there's a chance that people are getting what they want from this sort of second-hand intermediary, so we no longer have this sort of direct contact with the audience. So there are these sort of threats that are coming out of it, and these are the big sort of questions I think for us is how do we do with that? How do we continue to assert our sort of presence in the presence of these intermediary technologies and general sort of suspicious world?
I can talk to the ownership of data. That was something that fascinated us really in the project we did with Serpentine. We recorded 15 choirs. It was all an AI project, of course. We recorded the choirs with they of course signed their copyright over to us so we could work with the recordings. And it was all a project because we know we are fascinated by the fact that AI learns from data, and the artists wanted to work and they did create a machine learning system where you could sing like I would talk now, and it would come back through all those choirs because the voice filter sort of had learned from all the choirs how it is when not I just speak, but I would speak with all the choirs through a machine learning system. The project that we did was a bit about data ownership in the sense that we hired an independent data intermediary, or Serpentine hired. I was the researcher on the project. And then worked with the choirs by finding the right legal system for them for data trusts. What was super interesting, and probably will not surprise any of you, is that they were not interested about what happens with their data. They were interested what happens with their music. They wanted a copyright for the music, but they were not interested, for example, to allow other artists to train with the data. And they were not even interested to meet with our data intermediary very much because, data is this thing as a normal subject of everyday life as a normal citizen. It's annoying. It whether gets stolen or we have not a very good relationship for data. And I think in a society where we have learning with AI, this really, really needs to change. So it's very good that choirs are organized and have a choir lead. So that choir lead had decided to work with our data intermediary. So the project was in the end quite successful, but what we learned was really that society is not really ready to share the data when we have these industry projects or social projects of data sharing. No one is used to it. Everyone is used to GDPR and to be afraid of what happens to their data and data minimization. There are very, very small areas in society. Medical is one area where this works well, where people are very happy to give their data so that society can use and learn something useful with them. And we need more best practice examples if we want industry to do the same and people to be happy and have trust that anyone can do something with data. So no good news for now.
And yeah, from my perspective, with the creatives and the industry, we work quite a lot with industry bodies and talking to them a lot about what their members are thinking and feeling as well. And I think the challenges are obviously the creative industries. That's a broad industry. There are many different verticals within that. What they all have in common is that they're built on this notion of creative IP. That is the asset that they have. If you don't have that, what do you have? What are you trading in? What is your business model based on? So anything that is a threat to that is really significant, and we saw that last year. In the reaction to the consultation, a very, very strong reaction about that from the creative industries. Having said that, they are also very different. So whilst they have that in common, sometimes I think it's challenging for us to talk about these things as a whole for the creative industries because these different subsectors have their different challenges. We're talking about content of completely different modalities. They have completely different value chains within each of these businesses. If we're talking about a video that's made by a single creator who uploads it online and is owned by that person, that's entirely different from a piece of broadcast content or a film that has a complex, flow of rights associated with it. So the challenges I think I see are around getting into the depths of how these things apply in practice in different parts of the creative industries and really getting into that depth and understanding the implications for different parts and not seeing them all in a more monolithic way.
Thanks, Becky. Yeah. Actually, I just have a follow-up question for Mercedes about the Serpentine Data Trust project, because it sounds like that was really exploring this concept of collective governance, right? And I just wondered what sort of insights you could maybe share further on that collective governance aspect. It sounded from your brief explanation there that perhaps there was less appetite for looking at relicensing of content. It was all about like kind of defensive measures around their content. Is there something about the collective nature that you think maybe promoted that, or maybe you can just unpack that a bit more?
Yeah, I think it's quite important to understand that people are not used to this, right? They're normally used to sign their rights away once, giving to the publishers, and the publishers organize these things. And this is how a normal citizen understands the situation. The collective governance is interesting in the sense that we can very clearly say that from the more than, there were 15 UK choirs, so quite a lot, over 100 people, hundreds interacted in over 100 people interacted in our meetings with us and with a trusted data intermediary, which was Jennifer Ding. She's wonderful and very patient and explained everything really well. But people were very interested more to give their rights to a data intermediary or a data trust, a lead, and not to, it's everyday changes of law and to deal with that. No one has time in their lives at the moment, so that wasn't very surprising. The collective governance was therefore something that they welcomed because it was less work for the individual. They were a bit split in the question, should they allow further training of cultural projects with it or not? What we found out is that it's quite good if there's a data intermediary, there are mechanisms to ask back and so on. But we also really found that whether the legal mechanisms nor the social framework or any sort of framework is really existing for a time in which we can use data to train machines that inform then society or economy. If we move from a time where data was just content that is published and consumed to a time where data can be used to train an intelligent machine learning system, which is a total different project because it's synthesizing, it's not memorizing, or sometimes it is, but most of the time it isn't. So I think we are not society is not ready and hasn't had that conversation fully and can't grasp their head around what is an AI system doing and why could I be interested to give my data away.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Okay, so next question is about provenance. As you can see, that's been a big focus for the Centre's research. Some of you are involved even in provenance standards. So I'm interested to hear, to what extent you feel that provenance can help rebuild trust in digital content, or I'm happy to hear views as to why it can't or what its limits are as well. Controversial for today, perhaps. But any views on that role of provenance in digital trust?
I think. Well, perhaps I can speak to it certainly in the work that we've done and its connection, particularly on protecting copyright, protecting content online. It's really the work we put forward in the ACT report was essentially a framework for a machine-readable approach to ascertaining provenance, connecting that to ownership and to licensing information, contracting, and ultimately realizing value to content online, and what that could look like in a machine-readable way. And so, I mean, ultimately, I think what we saw through that was that it was really underpinned by provenance. It was a really core part of that framework of technologies that would need to underpin any system like this that worked at the scale that we need it to work. So I think, and I'm really pleased to see all the work that you've been doing and how much that seems to have permeated the consciousness, I think, in the creative industries that I've seen, particularly over the last year, and the debate that has been ignited around all of this. I think that's something that is so much better understood now, and I think to some people, they were awoken to it by their interest and vested interest in the copyright debate, but they also see the huge benefits it has and the trust and on that side of the debate as well. So yeah, for us, I think it is really essential.
Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, we tried to just establish this early on in our work in R&D. Does adding provenance data actually increase trust in news? And we did a large survey, and thankfully it does, right? People say, especially if they're not normally sort of BBC viewers, they think that provenance data helps, across a lot of demographics. So it's a very positive thing. But I would also agree with one of the presenters just before this panel that actually provenance means different things to different people, and what the kind of provenance people tune into is different if you're sort of an audience consumer, where we learn that actually they want quite simple things. They want to know if it's been verified, what edits there were, who created it, sort of very simple, broad brush things. Whereas obviously if you're a forensic journalist, and you're trying to corroborate lots of incoming data, maybe it's incoming data from sort of individuals, user-generated content, as we like to call it, you want to corroborate things. So therefore, a much more forensic provenance data is really helpful because we can check GPS and we can do things like that. So I think provenance data obviously is a good thing, and I think the public will become more used to it and more expectant of it. But I also think we just have to be careful that we're getting the right provenance data to the right people, and not, as one of your earlier speakers said, not overburdening people. I think also with news in particular, because that's obviously a big spiky thing for the BBC to try and get right. it offers potential, but news obviously, you can accidentally cause harm as well by passing too much provenance on, because news is meant to be of the moment, and what's fair in the moment of witnessing an incident isn't fair 3 years later when it's still hanging around on the internet. So there are all sorts of policy issues as well, but generally it's a good thing, but we do have to be careful how we use it and make sure that it is accessible for people in the right level.
Thanks, Nigel. Yeah, and good call out to Katerina's work there on the content authenticities. I know there's a whole string of work being done there, including a follow-on project with Braid exploring those questions. So thank you. Mercedes, any view on that?
Well, our research was not directly towards provenance, but of course, watermark is something that's quite a lot discussed in the AI landscape, I'd say. Where it, funnily enough, proves the opposite, not the authenticity, but the inauthenticity. And the question is, how much do we need this? Or would it make a difference if all the big platforms, let's call them platforms or systems, Gemini, OpenAI, Anthropic, if they would all say, okay, what comes out of us is watermarked as good as possible, and we would make this a new norm to help us to orientate us in the digital environment. And I think that's really worth something that we can discuss. And it's a bit astonishing that it's not discussed enough, given that the advent of AI is totally changing the cultural landscape.
Thank you. I think that does lead us a little bit into the next question, which is really about, what else needs to happen. So with respect to your watermarking comment, I can certainly see, in the AI labelling legislation around the world, to certain degrees, people are advocating for, different levels of robustness in AI labelling. But it's a broad landscape, right? There's technical, there's commercial, there's regulatory things that could happen to improve the situation, either for trust or for better, content, rights and reuse. So I wonder, in your view, if you could choose just, maybe just one thing or, a couple of things if you're brief, then what do you think, really kind of has to happen next to enable a kind of fair ecosystem for content reuse or better trusted content?
Well, I can start. Yeah. So I think obviously there's a lot of interest in trying to rebalance the emerging ecosystem, make sure it's fair and handle the right values. I think there's a sort of a slight lack of available, provable technology. So I'm particularly interested in the training data attribution you talked about with Aura. I think these kind of things, until we establish these things, we can't give them to a regulator and we can't say do anything about it. So I think the regulator obviously is the answer to the problem, but only when we have actually solved the problem of how do you have attribution through, say, an LLM or an AI machine? How do you continue to, how can you make provenance data robust? And these we see these as sort of nascent research threads, and they're very promising. And I think once we start getting some momentum around that, there are ways of managing this in a more eventful way, then we can look to policy people to say, maybe we should think about trying to legislate these technologies into the ecosystem.
Thank you.
In my field, it's more, in the English-speaking world, people are a bit lazy because the American development in AI is so far ahead. But a public AI system also not just from France, Switzerland, Denmark, Sweden, all countries that want to make sure their language has a proper share. I think it would be good to have a public AI or open AI developed as well going forward, and I think that's really important. I've worked my life always about open systems. I have an open access press, and I think that aspect is something that's quite important.
And I think from my perspective, I'm just always looking for sort of practical ways of demonstrating, I think, what can be done, because I think some of the potential ways forward that we identified in the work that we did earlier this year still feel very intangible to a lot of the creative industries, the businesses and the individuals who will need to engage with it. And my biggest concern is where I see fear really being the enemy of progress. And we saw an absolutely huge amount of that last year, like really well-founded fears about things, as I said earlier, about, real threats to sort of what the creative industries are built on, potentially. That's the worry. But we don't want to let that stop us making progress. We can't sort of just give up. So, and one of the things I think that really ultimately helps that is where we need to start breaking it down, seeing really practical demonstrations of it. And as I said, breaking it down into those different subsectors of the creative industries and understanding how it's going to work in practice. So I'd just love to see more of that.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, please.
I really like the project of the National Data Library that was in the original action plan that we had for AI for the UK. If anyone knows anything about where we are with that, please come and find me after the panel.
No hands. Okay, great. Yeah, Becky, just to follow up about your comments there, because I mean, the ACT report work, obviously, is, I think one of the areas was it sort of focused on was what's possible today versus what's possible tomorrow. And I just wonder, just thinking, if those problems could be solved, what, in your view, would, sort of a fair and equitable, sustainable, creative ecosystem, look like in, I don't know, 5 or 10 years?
Well, okay, so the utopia question. So, I mean, ultimately, creatives want to feel in control of the content they make, of the IP that they have created and owned. So a system in which you have confidence in the fact that what you put out into the world is protected and attributable to you, and that there are systems in place that are going to help you protect yourself, and it's not going to be down to you trying to take OpenAI to court or something as an individual. That's what people want to believe in. So it's a system in which creators feel protected, in which that fear doesn't then stop, because I genuinely see people's projects, people who have really interesting creative ideas enabled by AI, and they don't go anywhere because maybe they speak to, I don't know, a talent agent or something who hears the word AI and says, nope, I shut that down, I don't know what it means, I'm too scared. And that's what we don't want to see. So we want to see if those problems could be solved and we got to a system that people felt confident in, but also that people are actually realizing some value from, that's the utopia. That's where we want to get to, because there's value to be had on all sides if we can unlock it.
Okay, thank you. Nigel, on the provenance side, I mean, what do you think we could do, as an ecosystem to kind of drive adoption of standards? I mean, like CTPA that obviously let people express provenance information. It's still a curve that we're ramping up on that front. Is there anything you think could be done?
It is, and to some extent we're winning though, because a lot of consumer devices are now beginning to see these things in cameras and stuff, and that does raise awareness. And in particular, within the BBC, a very important part of the BBC is the news desk, and so incoming signals that now have C2PA data does actually educate, if you like, the professionals in the business that actually this does make sense, this is useful, and then maybe we should think about this more. So I think to drive it forward, I think obviously we need to talk about it more, but really we need to persuade people working within the value chains of its real value. That it's not just, as you say, more metadata. That it can help them in their job. It can help automate processes, which means they can help use a wider range of input sources, because now they're no longer overwhelmed. There's a way of filtering these things down to somebody who can actually see what happens. And obviously within a public service, we're also kind of interested to explore how it helps with some of our distribution. We're exploring ideas with a social media company to try and figure out how that really works. And again, that's really informing the architects and the people who have to engineer this thing within a current system, because we recognise that we have to sort of walk very carefully. But the more people have visibility of it, the more feedback we get, then the easier it is. It just becomes more of a kind of an everyday thing. Ultimately, if the public start asking the right questions, then that will also drive it forward. So we kind of have the answer to some extent. It's just a question of developing it further and making it real in people's lives, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Great. We do have maybe 10-15 minutes left. I'm keen to make sure we have opportunity for input from the floor. I mean, does anyone have any questions for our panel on this topic of authenticity and copyright in the creative sector. Yep. Gentleman in the middle. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that. I have a quick question. So we hear a lot about words such as provenance and attribution today, which is great. We use it a lot in our field. But these terms, I feel, are not well understood outside our bubble of academia and the work that we do. So how do you actually work with creative practitioners to understand these words and what the implications are for their work? Yeah, so that's my question. How do we actually operationalize this in, let's call it, the real world?
That is a very, very good question, because I think we found, really did find that when we were putting that report together, we had academics and technologists in the room, we had people from various different parts of the industry, and attribution is a brilliant example of that, because in one context that is about attributing, which is the most which subset of data is most responsible for, say, a given output. But actually, to most of the creative industries, that's talking about more of a legal sense. That's about moral right to be attributed as the author of a work. And only a couple of weeks in did we realise we were talking the same word in a completely different language. And it happened again and again. And my conclusion really is it really is by finding those projects to work on together and then nutting out those differences and being really aware of those is how you bring those to the fore. And we realised in our reporting we had to we created a glossary, and we had to be really explicit about calling out where we were saying different things. Because it was like a light bulb moment. That, and there were a couple of other things. There was the word registry, kept coming up again and again, meant different things to different people. And a light bulb went off. I thought, we really just all think we're saying the same thing, and we're saying something different. So I think it's a good point. I don't have a magic answer for it, apart from we all have to be really aware of it. And the more sort of tangible collaborations we have together, the more opportunities we have to really expose it and then find a common ground. Yeah, that's the best I have.
I would just add, I think it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation in the sense that until it's out there, people don't know to ask for it or to expect it. But I think, attribution and monetization, or maybe just a form of protection, is a big incentive for people. And I think there's a general sense that there must be some way of protecting or recognizing people's work. So I think some of, we see some work around monetization based on provenance or based on rights and this kind of thing. And maybe that would also incentivize the whole ecosystem to sort of wake up and recognize that this could work really well for everybody. So, and I think people do have a sort of an innate sort of understanding of ownership, shall we say, and how to just recognise that in the same way as artists always look after each other's sort of copyright and look after each other's works and give proper attribution. So there's a sense of it can be an instrument for engendering that kind of those kind of ideas. So operationalising it throughout the value chain obviously takes a lot of different value chain players. I mean, ultimately the end game would be that your browser natively checks out for provenance and reports the provenance status. That would be the end game. But as I said, it's a bit of a chicken and egg, because although that can be done, it's not going to be done until people demand it, and they're not going to demand it until they're tired of moving their images to some other website that can verify their provenance for them. So I think we just keep on going, and we just allow people to see that there may be a way forward in the kind of current struggles that we're in.
Yeah, I think a lot of translation work needs to be done. I mean, Becky's talked about that also, that there's a danger that the creative is turning away from the technological part and say, I don't want to work like this, is not my work. And I think, we need to interest people more, and there's also a big chance that the artists and creatives can translate that for the citizens, who should also and need to know more as we are going into a world that's more and more technical.
Thank you. Have we still got a question? Yeah, thank you.
So this is a follow-up question, and I think for Becky. So you mentioned with the report, so now with CoStar and the organisations that you're working with within CoStar, the creative organisations. So is some of the discoveries from the report being fed into that
So is that work continuing to be fed into it? Yes. Yes, I mean, there's some continuing work through the BRAID project that John mentioned previously. We continue to bang the drum for the kind of the work that we put into the ACT project and what that could mean. So wherever there are those opportunities to continue to engage with on the government side, we do that where we can, and John's been really leading the charge there. But I would like to see, and we will see if there's the opportunity for this, but some more, like I say, of these sort of demonstrator type projects in different areas of the creative industries. That's what I'd really like to see. But we're still looking for the opportunities to push those forward.
Okay, great, thank you. Maybe I go to Tom perhaps next.
So I'll emphasise that I'm not an artist or a creative. I don't know the industry very well. Nigel alluded to a sort of honourable culture of crediting inspiration among artists. But I wonder how much the research that's been done, particularly by Mercedes, extended to artists who aren't established, and whether they're happy with the sort of the IP frameworks as they exist. And I wonder if there's potential to make use of some of these same technologies for identifying what are the most likely sources within a corpus of images that have been fed into a large language model to also identify what might be inspiration among artists that has not been credited by other artists. Do you see what I mean? Do you think there's an appetite for that kind of use of the technology?
Sorry, can you explain that again? The last bit.
My thinking here is that artists probably take inspiration from seeing one another's art, and that may well be credited in all cases, but there are some famous anecdotal examples of debate. There's good examples of IP maybe being misappropriated, like Bob Dylan, sort of using a lot of folk music and getting the IP rights for it. Do you think some of the less established artists would be receptive to use of technologies which have been developed for identifying which images might have been used by AI to create an image, to also be used to more easily identify where one artist's work has been an inspiration to somebody else's work, without it being done?
It's a difficult area because, as you explained it yourself, some artists quote other artists to honor them, other people quote other artists to steal from them, and in what ways the quote work different is really hard to decide. It's probably how open you speak about it, where this comes through. And citation is allowed according to copyright, so that makes the question: do you need provenance there or not?
It's an interesting technical challenge. I remember we had a project funded by AHRC a while back towards the National Collection programme, and it was looking at design provenance. And we worked with this researcher. I think she was possibly at V&A, and she's very interested in the history of the Paisley and how it could be traced back, and was it attributed. And there we weren't trying to quantify it. We were building search tools to help art historians research that. But maybe that was using fingerprinting actually. So maybe there was some application for tools in that area. Alan?
Yeah, sorry, responsible for most of the things you mentioned. Really. I'm a director at HLC, DECaDE. Wanted to ask, apologies if it was covered earlier in the day because I wasn't here for the very start, about awareness of energy consumption, carbon emissions, particularly everything's a balance. And I'm thinking about and I don't know, John, how efficient now provenance, either blockchain or non-blockchain driven, is in terms of energy efficiencies. And I recognise, Mercedes,
anyone want to weigh on that? I've got something I'd like to say about that, but let the panel
speak. The artists are all very aware of that. But there's at the same time a big debate going on. Where does the carbon emission come from? And, is it attributed to AI wrongly or rightly, or what's going on? It always changes. It's very hard to find numbers. A lot of people then that debate for one side that, the fashion industry is much more carbon intense than actually, the AI, but then at the same time, there is no way around that we do build more and more data centers in areas where we probably shouldn't. In the creative sector area, that is very much a discussion.
I would second that as well. In fact, I would say that, through the history of sort of DLT, that one of the things, I mean, there are other things too, but one of the things that held it back was what was perceived as being a huge amount of it, because before AI, so different standards, but perceived as being a huge waste of energy to do something that some other system could do very efficiently. And so the response to that was, first of all, don't touch that technology, then we don't need it, and it's just wasteful, which is a position. But of course, things got a lot more efficient, and the consensus algorithms changed strategically and dynamically to make that sort of big wasteful aspect go away, or at least it did on some chains, not necessarily Bitcoin. And then people argue about using electricity that can't really be used, gas flares and things, and power that's not necessarily available everywhere else. So there's lots of mitigations put in place. But I suppose the top level is things get more efficient because technologies have to react to that concern if they think their technology has value. Obviously, AI is kind of another story because it's not clear yet, because everybody's just held on to making everything bigger and faster and diverting rivers and all the rest of it, and that does concern people. It does leave a bad taste in their mouth. So that is, it's not holding it back in the same way as it did DLT, but it is a constant kind of worry and anxiety that maybe this is actually the wrong direction. But we can hope that maybe, like DLT, maybe they'll discover actually we can benefit from this technology in a much more energy efficient way. And we have to hope that then we get the best of both worlds. We don't have to stop it, and we don't have to carry on in the way that we currently think we're going to carry on. So I think that's it is a major sort of downside of this whole thing. But I hope, following from the DLT story, that maybe things can improve.
I can't comment on, I don't think it specifically related to provenance. All I would say just from the CoStar perspective is that we're also very aware of it, and I think we've discovered, I don't think there are a huge amount of, again, I'm coming back to these sort of practical case studies that companies can learn from in this area, and we're looking at trying to create a set of case studies around companies using AI and the carbon footprint of that, and how that might compare to the other ways they might have done things. So we're looking at that area as well.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I feed in on the provenance side as well. So as we've discussed, CTPA is essentially a content supply chain technology, and much as you care about the carbon footprint of your EV or the materials footprint of your EV, so you would about your digital content. And we published a paper actually earlier this year where we were basically embedding within CTPA manifest inside the metadata the water, carbon and energy footprint of Gen AI assets, and then we were essentially using that then to trace the sustainability footprint of the assets through the content supply chain, so that you could take a photo of a poster and it would tell you, what's the footprint of the poster based on the generative AI assets in the poster, and that was called Energy Mark, and we published it a couple of months ago actually at WACV. And it would be great if such assertions became part of the CTPA standard. So I guess we watch this space maybe. Chris, last question.
Let's assume for a moment that we adopt these technologies, and everything when we're making new content, we're embedding provenance and it's being read widely. What do we do with everything old? So what can we do with archives? How can we, all that content and the things we've already been trained on? So it's kind of like a question of a temporality. And let's assume we solve lots of these problems. What do we do with the old stuff?
Good questions. I think one point I'd make there is I think we have to acknowledge that with some content, and I'm thinking particularly about audiovisual sort of video, maybe broadcast or film content here, it's one thing to solve the technical problems and some of the logistical problems around how you might attach this and trace this information. But it's predicated on the notion that you can grant rights and that you know what those rights are, and that that is a straightforward thing to do, and that's not always the case particularly with, to your point, archive content. Content that was made at a time when the idea of licensing it for purposes of AI was not even a notion, which is not that long ago. These types of content have complex flows of rights, and it's not straightforward to suggest. We can't assume basically that those content owners just have the right to do that. So it's not only this technical challenge, it's a legal issue, it's a lot of things. So with that in mind, I think that question of what you do with stuff in the past is very complicated, and that there may be content that in reality you just can't, or it's just not worth the effort to do that for this purpose. But that said, I really do believe that there is huge value in a lot of archive content, that if we can take a pragmatic approach to some of it, could release value for all parties. But yeah, it's a tough problem to solve, and we do need to think about these two problems going forward and going backwards. I think they are different. They're different questions. Yeah.
Just so you could have some sort of minimal provenance data. It depends on the point of access. But if you've got something in an archive, as you say, and it's all, if it's being published again, then that's not so bad, because at the point of publication, you can just put a very simple tag on saying published by. So even though you don't have other provenance data, you have that minimal provenance data. So at least people are satisfied that the last known origin of this has declared itself. So there's that kind of thing. But that would have to be done sort of live, as it's published, if it's being republished. Otherwise, it would be at the point of access. So I suppose there's an overhead there, because you have to sort of do binding and things. But nevertheless, it's if you accept a very sort of crude form of provenance, just the minimum amount that says who's currently archived you're examining, then I think that it's probably a lot easier than, say, trying to redigitize an archive. I don't think it's a problem of that scale. It's just a problem of having that timestamper on the output that says, when people access this content, can we please just do this little kind of maths and stick a simple sign manifest in there. So it's not as bad as maybe you think, but it is an overhead.
I think some, like Getty, for example, are also really interested in having this available for them. Depends on, that you make money with it or not.
Great. Well, look, thank you, Becky, Nigel, Mercedes. I see you've sat in the approved order, by the way. I do appreciate that. Thank you very much for joining the event today, sharing your expertise on this topic. It's been super interesting, and thank you, everyone, for such an engaging session. So round of applause, perhaps, for our panellists.